Hello, and welcome to the Mothers of All Crime. This is a podcast where we deep dive into mothers involved in infamous crimes and scandals. I'm Monica, and this is Crystal.
Hi, Monica.
Hey, Crystal.
How you doing?
I'm really good. Thanks for asking. How are you?
I'm good. Another day in paradise, talking about another mother.
Oh, yeah.
We do. This one is very emotional for, I feel like anybody who looks into it, the judge that was in the trial. Um, it just breaks your heart just hearing some of these testimonies and stuff. So, why don't you introduce us to our mother of the week?
So, our mother of all crimes this week is Shanda Vander Ark, which some people say Shanda, but I think it's Shanda.
There's
Spelled
a
with an
U
A,
in there.
but regardless, she's our mother of focus, and she came to national attention pretty quickly after her 15-year-old son, Timothy, was found dead in Shonda's home in Michigan on July 6, 2022. The apparent cause of death was starvation and hypothermia.
Mm-hmm.
And a series of events obviously led us to that point, and many happened afterwards. But that is our scene that has been set, is that a 15-year-old boy is dead in his home. He weighed 69 pounds, and his brother, Paul, his youngest brother, who I think they're calling G for all the trial stuff, was
Mm-hmm.
8. And then he had other siblings that did not live at home, 2 older siblings. His mother, Shanda, was with her second husband, Adam. She had previously been married to Paul Ferguson, who is Timothy Ferguson's father. They have 4 kids together, and they live together in Oklahoma. And then Shanda remarried after her divorce. Adam, who was a man that used a wheelchair, and they had a son, and so Shonda had a total of 5 children. And it's pretty horrific.
Yeah, it's super sad. And so, continuing with the scene, this is the case and the death of Timothy occurred in Norton Shores, Michigan. However, they weren't always in Michigan. They moved there. Um, they actually originally lived in Oklahoma, where this family was not like the average family. They already were having issues. And when they were all living in Oklahoma, Child Protective Services actually were already involved with this family. And the investigation with Oklahoma started, and they didn't lose full custody of all of the children, but she definitely started being fully investigated by the state. She ended up losing custody of her children, and full custody went to the father, which I think most people can kind of assume that when a father is getting that full custody, you know that the mother is being looked at for some pretty serious things. Family was originally living in Oklahoma. Child Protective Services were already involved with this family. So sadly, the fact that things got worse personally wasn't super surprising. I wish I could say when a family and protective service gets involved, it actually helps the family, but that's majority of the time, particularly with other examples we've talked about, it's not always the case. Um, but during their investigation, the father actually took full custody of the children, and she didn't have parental rights at the time. And for anybody who either has been involved with like any kind of custody battle, if a father is getting full custody and not the mother for multiple children, as well as having no visitation rights, that's some serious allegations against the mother. And unfortunately, I don't know about you, I couldn't find specifics about that because when they left Oklahoma, basically the case got dropped because they moved out of state and states don't communicate with each other about that kind of stuff. So, it,
So I found stuff on Reddit. I definitely don't know how substantiated all of these things are. Probably not very, not very, but
right.
the cases are sealed. They're closed and they're sealed, and that's to protect the children involved. And I think that's the right way to
Correct.
handle it,
Oh, yeah.
probably.
Hmm.
But for the purposes of us discussing it, it does make it more difficult to not have all of the information. My understanding of what happened in Oklahoma is that there were allegations of abuse against Shanda and not her husband, Eric. And that's why he was given the option of retaining custody of the children if Shanda would leave and she would give up custody of the children.
Yeah. But like, I couldn't figure out what those like allegations were because was it allegations of like she's beating her children or like she forgot her kid at school? Because unfortunately, there's such a range when it comes to those allegations.
So my understanding, again, from what I've read, is that there were accusations that she was not properly caring for Timothy, and I think he was about 18 months old when the investigation started, and he was malnourished or very underweight at the time, and there were uh, allegations of abuse and neglect against Shanda about Timothy specifically.
Got it.
Right.
Yeah. So eventually, after she actually voluntarily waived those rights with those 4 children in Oklahoma, which I thought was interesting.
Yes.
And
Well, otherwise they probably would have been terminated.
oh, absolutely.
But you're right. She did waive it.
But it's kind of interesting where again, most people aren't thinking that a mother's gonna go, you know what, sure, whatever, it's fine. But she eventually was allowed supervised visits for 3 hours a month with all 4 children that she had with her ex-husband. And it's unknown the specifics, and this is where things get mucky, because she ended up moving back to Michigan, or moving to Michigan. And
right.
As we know, Timothy died in her home. Her eldest, Paul, was in the home with her. It's interesting how all of a sudden she has Timothy in her custody, where she had only had supervised visits at that time in Oklahoma. So something had to have changed for that to have occurred.
So, to my understanding, she never got legal custody of him back. She had, of course, physical custody of him because he physically lived in her home. But I think what happened is that her and her ex-husband worked out an unofficial arrangement where she took over his care.
Mm-hmm.
He only lived with her for 14 months, but Paul, his older brother, had lived with Shanda previously to that. He moved there first because Shanda remarried, so she's living with her husband. They have a kid, and then Paul moves in with them after he had already become 18. So on his end and on his father's end, he's an adult.
Oh, yeah.
So they don't need a court order. He doesn't need anybody's permission to go move to Michigan and live with his mother and his stepdad and his little brother. He's just allowed to do that. But Timothy was 14, so he was a minor. And it's worth mentioning he's a minor with disabilities. He'd been diagnosed as autistic, as bipolar, ADHD. He had sensory processing disorder. There were multiple diagnoses, and he was receiving help in Oklahoma, and he was on medication. He was under the care of a doctor. And then it seems to me that he was removed from school in Oklahoma, and he was just picked up and put down in Michigan. I don't think that they asked anybody's permission. I don't think they transferred any kind of custody. In the trial, Shanda mentioned that they had discussed Eric signing over custody of Timothy, but he never actually did it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in my opinion, I don't think she wanted the state of Michigan to be aware that she had this child that she should not have had, because she did not have custody of him and she was supposed to have supervised visitations with him. I don't think that she was supposed to have him, and I think that that was a huge factor in all of the events that unfolded.
Yeah. So, and it is important to note, I think, when it comes to Timothy's disability, is there was no question that he needed special care and special attention. But it's not like Shanda was uneducated. She not only boasts about it, but she's not wrong. She's highly educated. She graduated with honors from law school, from Michigan University, and she was working as a law
No, she didn't.
clerk at like another county. Yeah.
Sorry. This is like something I really, really wanted to talk about because it annoys me so much. I do feel like she's pretending that she went to Michigan, which is a very, very good law school. That's not where she went. She was not at a good law school. I was very not impressed. I was actually kind of horrified by how she was discussing her fledgling law career, because she did go to law school. She did pass the bar. She was not an attorney though, because which is another issue. And I feel like maybe sure, but I kind of want to talk about this from my personal experience maybe, because I talked about this yesterday with my husband because he is a lawyer and he went to a very good law school, and I was talking to him about this case which he's not very familiar with, and he was like, "Oh my goodness, she went to Michigan? That's a really good school." And then he looked it up and she didn't. She went to Western Michigan University Cooley School of Law.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
it's it's not it's sometimes in the top 200 law schools.
Because
It's
like
not a good law
all of the
school.
interviews and even in court records, it says
Hmm.
Michigan University.
I know, but it's not. It's Western Michigan. It's a different school. It's not nearly as highly rated,
Mm.
and it's way less impressive. It's still
I
impressive. I
mean,
really don't want to
anybody who
shit on it at all.
yeah, anyone who goes to law school and passes the bar has to be a certain level of smart, though. Like, not everyone is going
She's
through that
in
time.
she is intelligent, but I think that she wants people to think that she's extremely intelligent. And I think that the way that she phrases things and the way that she explains things, it makes it seem like she highlights what she thinks are her good qualities and she does not. And I don't think anybody was really like a lot of the articles I see, it's just that she went to one of the top law schools in Michigan. Barely true. Barely true.
Yeah.
Definitely not one of the top law schools in this country, but not the best law school in Michigan. And she did get a scholarship. She did pass the bar on her first try, but that's only the test. There's another portion of the bar which I do not believe Shanda would have ever passed, because so the process of becoming a lawyer, you go to law school, you pass the bar exam, which is an actual test, and then there's another process called character and fitness. And in that part, you basically get a huge background check. They look into your finances, they look into your criminal history. My husband has one last name on his driver's license and two last names on his birth certificate, and he had an issue with character and fitness, and he had to prove that he is actually both of those people. And that's something that happens a lot because they're really trying to make sure that who they're admitting to practice law is the person and that they meet the criteria.
Mm-hmm.
And Shanda was ineligible for character and fitness, not because of her previous child abuse claims, but because she owed back child support about $25,000 and her wages were being garnished. You're not getting through character and fitness with that. She was not.
I hate to say it, just I don't. She might have. Unfortunately, there are the interview process from the individual seems so much scrutiny, but then when like push comes to shove, a lot more people get through that shouldn't. Um, and it's scary that like I would hope that that disqualifies her, but who knows? Because every state does it so differently too.
I mean, Michigan also at the time that she took the test, they were not part of the universal bar exam. So she would have, even if she had passed, she would have only been able to practice in Michigan. But they actually take financial issues much more seriously than a lot of criminal
Oh, absolutely. And
issues.
that's a national
You're much,
standard. Mm-hmm.
yeah, because a huge issue that comes up with lawyers is misappropriation of funds. So they're trying to not have people with that. And I do not think that she would have passed character and fitness, at least not the first time. She would have had to get a lawyer. She would have had to battle it out. It's not a simple process when you have something like that. When your wages are being garnished, it's not something that they even need to do a background check to see. It's going to be very obvious.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think she was passing that. She was doing a clerkship, ironically, in the appellate criminal court that she ended up being convicted through. Very ironic.
Yeah.
But I just want to point out, Shanda, you did not go to a very good law school. I'm sorry to everyone else that went there. You're probably great. But Shanda did not go to Michigan, and her bar score was not that impressive. And I'm not impressed.
Yeah. I hope that she wouldn't have passed the characters, but just knowing some circumstances, I wouldn't be surprised if she did, unfortunately. But she never even took it. So it doesn't seem like she ever had any interest in ever practicing. And like,
Well,
from a
she only
financial perspective, clerks make decent money. Like, I don't know if I think it was just easier for her. It was less work. Like, she's never pegged me as someone who wants to put in all the extra hours and work that attorneys need to do. And clerks it's a lot, I don't want to say easier, but it's a different route that doesn't necessarily take all that extra time and effort that a lot of attorneys have to put in.
So I also want to nitpick her about something else, because she talks a lot about how busy she was. And I'm not saying that someone with 5 children that's in law school is not busy. I think that makes you very busy. But at the time that Timothy lived with her, she was done with law school. She was doing a clerkship, and she was studying for the bar, and then she passed the bar. During her clerkship, her hours should have been about 8 to 4:30, 9 to 5. They're court hours.
Right, that's what
She was saying she was working 6 to 6. There is no court that's open and operating from 6 to 6. It's not a thing.
Yeah.
She's not as busy as she pretends to be.
Oh, yeah. But it doesn't fit the vibe of like how hard her life is if she just she has to play the part. So, I mean, it makes sense.
Well, it also sounds like you're way more busy if you just say you have 5 kids versus you say how many of them you have custody of, which at the time was 1, because her other kids were adults. She never got custody of them back. She did not have legal custody of Timothy. So the only custody that she had was of her 5th child, who was 8. So you really have 1 kid that you should be taking care of.
Yeah. So Timothy
not that busy.
Ended up over to her in July, was it? Let's see.
No, it was May. It was May 2021.
Okay. And he was pulled out. He started being homeschooled in January of 21. So it's one of those, I'm like, it's interesting where they started kind of like getting on the same page on paper, not reality, but like, hey, we're going to pull him out. The defense took it as he needs the special attention. It was incapable of being within the schools. The best way to educate him is through a homeschool setting for specialized attention, which, again, as a presenting up front, that does sound great. Like, hey, you're going to take your child, you're going to make it so that they can have a more focused education, have more help because they're disabled. But it very quickly came out that was not the reality. He wasn't getting that education. He wasn't getting that specialized attention. He wasn't getting all of these special helps that the defense tried to present once they were at trial.
Definitely not. And Shanda didn't help her own case because she contradicted herself multiple times during the trial about why he was homeschooled, the rationale behind it. She had a lot of different excuses that all contradicted each other. basically it's Timothy's fault because he's too bad to go to school. It's her ex-husband's fault because he wouldn't give her the paperwork that she needed. It was she's too busy. She can't go enroll him in person in school. She had a lot of reasons, none of which I think were the reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not against homeschooling. I actually think it could be a really good option for a lot of people. But I think that unfortunately, it's something that abusive parents sometimes do to keep their kid secluded, isolated, and out of other people's eyes.
Yeah, and we've talked about already a couple of families that this is a theme with,
Mm-hmm.
and we have a couple more coming up that are going to have the theme of homeschooling. And I think you're right, where if it's used in the right circumstance, it can be amazing. Some homeschool kids are some of the smartest ones I've met, but at the same time, it can be really dangerous in the wrong hands and control for sure. So while he was quote unquote being homeschooled, Timothy was actually being tortured. Day in and day out, every day, all day, up until he basically died within the home July 6th of 2022.
Right. So I think that the entire time that he lived with Shanda was probably horrible, but it seems like when Shanda's husband, Adam, had his stroke in January and he moved out because, okay, this also doesn't make sense to me. I'm going to have to take it back for a second. So Adam had a lifelong disability and was in a wheelchair. And then he had a stroke, and all of a sudden the stairs in their house were a problem, and he couldn't live there because of the stairs. But he was already in a wheelchair. So is this home not accessible for people who can't use stairs?
I just wonder if it's more of like a safety thing where if you're in a wheelchair and fully able to take care of yourself and do things for yourself, if they had like a little, I don't know, you know those little like chairs that you sit in, like, and they like elevate you up the side. Like, I wonder if they had something like that, and like because he was otherwise functioning fully and can take care of himself, it was fine. But once you have a stroke, people tend to need a lot more care, and if you have a really bad one, you lose some mobility where he wouldn't be able to get himself around. It might have become like, listen, it's not safe for him anymore to be alone in the house. Like, that was my only thought.
I mean, maybe that could be. It makes more sense than all of a sudden the house is not handicap accessible because he was already like, it should have already been. And also, I don't know, if my husband, God forbid, had a stroke and he could not get to where we live, we would have to move.
Right, and you would think like move as a family, not just be like, okay, bye.
Yeah, or honestly, we would all be living with his parents. I would not just be like, oh, well, his parents can just take care of him now, and we are just going to stay here.
No, that's absurd.
And I understand like financial constraints, but Shanda and Adam did not own the home that they lived in. And maybe it would have been wise to rent somewhere else if that's not, like, get an apartment where you can take an elevator. I don't know how extensive Adam's issues were post-stroke, but I mean, he wasn't in a hospital. He was living with his parents. So I don't know if they had round-the-clock nursing for him or if his parents were caring for him all of the time, but it just seems like he could live in a residential setting, and that's your husband, so it just seemed really odd to me.
Yeah, no, it more was odd for me where she didn't go with him. It wasn't the house being inaccessible that actually kind of felt like, it felt weird, but it was like, all right, I can see how that could happen. But like the fact she didn't go with him was weird to me because yes, she's at work all day and like he would need help during the day. Okay, that's where your parents step in or you hire a nurse to step in. But like the fact you were living separately is just bizarre, particularly when you have a child together who's 6, 7, 8 years old during all of this. Like, they're consciously aware of what's happening. Like, it's not like they're an infant and they don't know. Like,
if I'm Shanda and I'm working full time and I have this little child and my husband is so ill that he cannot physically get into our home, we are all going to go move in with his parents so they can help us and provide childcare.
Right.
Because clearly they're willing to do that. And she seemed like she was very close with his parents, with her in-laws.
Right.
But she was also hiding a lot of things from them, which I think is important as well. Because she stopped letting Adam's mother, her mother-in-law, she stopped letting her in the house after the stroke. And that is because the cleanliness of the house decreased so quickly and so badly. The house was a pit.
Mm-hmm.
It was disgusting. There was stuff everywhere. It was not picked up. Apparently Adam was doing all of the house cleaning prior, but nobody picked up where he left off.
Right.
Nobody. It was disgusting. And she said that the parents couldn't come in because the house was disgusting. So they would come pick up their grandchild from her house, and the child would stand outside and wait for them because they couldn't come in.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that they also were intentionally hiding Timothy, or Shanda was intentionally hiding Timothy from, her in-laws as well. Because
Sure.
I think they would have questioned things.
And not even like question of like, hey, when did you get your son? Because that's a normal question. But I think more questions of like, this is a 15-year-old boy weighing under 70 pounds. Like, picture any teenage boy. I don't care how small you are. 70 pounds is unhealthy and not okay. And you're going to be able to notice that this kid's not okay. So I think it would be hard for her. The questions wouldn't even be like, hey, when did you get Timothy? It'd be more like, what's happening inside that house? And there's no way to hide that.
Exactly. I don't think anybody was seeing Timothy other than Shanda and Paul and their littlest brother, who I just want to say his name, but I'm going to call him G for this.
Yeah. And I will say...
And I don't...
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, based on Adam has, he passed away in 2023, but he gave interviews and stuff prior to that, which he did not die from the stroke. He had leukemia. He really had a string of bad luck. But he said that he never saw child abuse and that it wouldn't have been tolerated if he was there. And then Paul has gone on to say that there were no food restrictions when Adam was living there. So I think really from January 3rd to July 6th is when the bulk of everything happened.
Oh, absolutely. And it definitely seemed like he was a decent guy who just kind of was like, he ran that house, he took care of everything, he did everything. There's been no signs of abuse or accusations or any concerns regarding the youngest child. Thank goodness.
Right.
He seems perfectly healthy, happy. I mean, he lived in the home while all this abuse and torture was happening, so who knows psychologically what that did to him. But thankfully, he himself didn't endure anything. And in Adam's defense is like, you meet someone, and even if there are these accusations, like, you listen to your partner, and what your partner tells you, you believe. And we'll never know the conversations they had or the story that she told him on why she doesn't have her children or yada yada. And if he had no reason to believe any of that would have been happening or would have happened if he wasn't around, like, I just feel like she talks a good game, and I think that he had no reason to not listen to her, and she probably just told him that her ex-husband was crazy and it was all him and blah blah blah, and she somehow probably made herself a victim with it, and he believed her like anyone would.
Yeah, I think that's probably exactly what happened, and I think that you could come up with an explanation for why your children's other parent has custody of them. I think people do that all the time. You could definitely make it seem, oh, well, I had to move, so I moved, and, the kids were in school, so they stayed there, but, I'm very involved with them. Yeah. We talk all the time, and I pay child support, and, whatever. Like, you could have a lot of explanations. People who are divorced usually don't live together, so their kids are either split between the homes or one of them has them the majority of the time.
Right.
So it's not that weird. It really isn't.
Yeah.
And maybe all the kids wanted to stay together in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a fair enough explanation. And you could just be like, I'm going to law school in Michigan. So that's why I moved here.
Right. So I think it just the kind of
So I think
everything aligned for her for that. So when he was making these interviews, he truly was like he had no idea. He never would have thought that she was capable of it until he wasn't there.
Ugh. I mean, who could believe? I still can't believe how bad this was.
Yeah, so I think we need to get into a little bit of what happened to poor Timothy.
Yeah.
Because we've been alluding to it, but we haven't really talked about some of the stuff this boy went through. Just to name a few, and obviously there are so many things that happened to him. The autopsy found that he died from dehydration. Hypothermia was involved. There was malnourishment, starvation. Through testimonies, it came out that he would be plunged into ice baths for up to 9 hours at a time. He was sleeping in a closet. They would take bread. So there were food restrictions, which we touched on, but he would only get fed bread or bread soaked in hot sauce, or they'd pour hot sauce straight down his throat if he got food at all. They wouldn't let him sleep, and they shackled him, and just, I think any form of just manipulation on somebody's life that could be done was done, which is why it was ruled a homicide. And she was charged with murder.
Yes.
And
yes,
the thing that creeped me out, and unfortunately that creeped me out the most of all of it, is there were surveillance cameras mounted around the house. So she could watch this in live time while she was like at work or out at the store, which I think just is even more disgusting. Just,
I mean, the cameras, the motion sensors, and the text messages were so incriminating that, I mean, it tells the story 100% of what happens. Because when we say text messages, it's Shanda and her son Paul are talking. There's so many. There are thousands of text messages specifically referencing the way that Paul is being instructed to treat Timothy. And there's stuff with the soaking the bread in hot sauce, which they got the most extreme. It's called extreme regret hot sauce. It is supposed to be like one of the spiciest ones. She had to special order it. And she said that she couldn't stomach it. So she never tried it.
Thought out, ordered, decided to give to child. Like, that wasn't just like, oh, I'm mad at my kid, let me grab something from the cabinet.
Her Amazon cart is also very incriminating because it's full of surveillance equipment and torture devices. And she's always saying that she doesn't have any time, she doesn't have any money, she doesn't have any whatever. She's so stressed, she's so run thin. I mean, it's not cheap to buy cameras for your whole house. She even had them in the bathroom. She had cameras everywhere. She had him sleeping with motion sensors on. And if he moved in his sleep, the sensors would go off and everyone in the house would wake up.
Yeah. But, conveniently
there are literal recordings.
Yeah. I don't remember how many times over and over again they would present those texts, those videos.
Oh my gosh.
I don't remember. Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
Oh my gosh. I don't even think we talked about that, but most frustrating thing ever to listen to. She said that she has PTSD as a result of seeing her husband after his stroke. She did not see him have a stroke. She saw him afterwards, which I'm not saying that's not traumatic, but whatever. She said that she had such severe PTSD that she would dissociate and she would have memory loss. And unfortunately, it was at very convenient times for Shanda. Anytime that she was upset about something, anytime she was punishing, anytime she was texting something terrible, she just does not remember it. And it's super convenient.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, some things she has just a picture perfect memory of, but these text messages that she's being shown printouts of, she can't remember.
And I think what it's interesting about...
I mean, I can't remember every text I've sent, but...
No, but, like, you remember, like, the gist of things happening. And there was one point during the trial that they actually had to stop reading some of the text messages because she claimed she was having a panic attack that was so debilitating that she couldn't listen anymore. And I give this judge a lot of credit because he stayed very professional during the entire trial, while also making it very clear how horrific this case was. And when he granted the recess for her to collect herself post panic attack, he kind of threw in like a little, like, I mean, it makes sense considering what you said. Like, it was just, that's not verbatim what he said, but it was more of like this little jab of like, yeah, you should be worried. He's like, because this is horrible. And I do like that they had like a male and female officer, and I think it was a detective, act out these texts so that the jury could grasp better, because it's confusing if one person reads both parts. So they really could have a better understanding of like the back and forth between her and her son about the torture. So I did like that.
I totally agree. Because I thought it was confusing when it was her reading both sides as well, because it was like, at what point are you talking? At what point is Paul talking?
Yeah.
So it's easier if two people read it, for sure. She just, I mean, I feel like that anxiety attack, if that had been authentic, that would have been the first time she had a normal reaction. If you truly did not remember doing these things to your child, but there's so much evidence that you are looking at with your eyes that you did these things, that should be so extremely distressing. I cannot fathom how disorienting and upsetting that would be, and I don't think anybody could hold their composure if that was truly what they were experiencing. But she really had she held it together a lot of the time. There were a couple times where she cried. There was once where she threw up. She was shown a picture of Timothy after he had passed away, and she threw up. But she'd already been shown the picture multiple times, and she saw him when he was dead.
Yeah.
So
I'm more likely to believe, like, Ruby Frank, who we've talked about, her reaction of, like, pain and realization. I'm more likely to believe that than I am about Shanda's reaction, because of just, during this trial, all of these things had already been presented to her. She had been able to review it. She had looked at it. And then now you're saying, like, oh, I don't remember seeing it, or, oh, we never got it, or you just now are upset and you weren't upset before. Like, it just doesn't add up.
I mean, it's wild to me that she did not plead guilty right off the bat, because of all of the evidence. I mean, you can watch videos of Shanda the night before Timothy is found dead. You can watch a video, or people have had to watch this video, and I've heard about it a lot and not actually watched it, of her dragging Timothy out of a bathtub that he'd been in for 9 hours into a closet that had a tarp on the bottom, and her just pushing him where he almost looked lifeless into the closet, and then her criticizing him for how loudly he was breathing and calling him a dummy.
And having the audacity to tell him that she deserved an apology.
She could watch that video of a recording that she knew existed because she purchased the surveillance equipment, and she is the one in the video. And then she also had the opportunity to view this evidence, and she still refused to plead guilty, and she took the stand in her own defense.
Which is never really
the level of narcissism.
Like, most of the time you don't see defendants taking the stand.
No.
Most attorneys don't want you to. It's a terrible idea.
But Crystal, she did not have a defense at all. She didn't even try to really present one. I don't understand what the case was.
Well,
there was no defense.
There was the defense.
She did do all of the stuff.
Oh yeah, no. The defense that they tried a couple different things. I do agree. I'm surprised that they didn't plead guilty, but then again, I think she was just trying to lower her sentence if possible, which surprised me because it's not like Michigan's a death penalty state. Like, they have life, but
Well, I
the death
mean,
penalty was out in the 60s back in Michigan. So it's not like she was fighting to stay alive. But they did
so
present.
spoiler alert, as we've,
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Sorry. No, I was just going to say, spoiler alert, she was obviously convicted, as we've said.
Oh.
But I think maybe she just wanted to have the right to appeal
Well,
because she worked in an appellate court, and I think she understood that if she pled guilty, she would not be able to appeal.
yeah. And like, so before we get to that phase of her trial, one thing they did present was that Timothy was on a hunger strike and he chose not to eat, which
Oh,
can't eat. Okay, your kid's on a hunger strike. Then why are your cabinets and fridge locked? Why are you in text messages upset that they ate a brownie? If I had a kid who was on a hunger strike, say they were, I'd be like, you want a brownie? Absolutely. Okay. You want a chip? You want to eat like garbage for days at a time? That's fine. At least you're eating. She's saying, nope, they were locked for his safety or whatever the defense was, which, again, something the defense tried, failed, because very quickly there's all this evidence showing that it's not true.
he definitely never went on a hunger strike, and thank goodness for all of these text messages, because otherwise you could have maybe, I wouldn't have, but I think that you could have made an argument that maybe the lack of eating was just like what he was choosing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the text messages prove that he not only is not on a hunger strike, he's trying to sneak food.
Yeah.
And that's what he's being punished for. That's the opposite of a hunger strike. This kid ate a pound of ground beef
Raw.
out of the fridge, not cooked. Yeah. He ate an entire bag of frozen chicken nuggets, which Shanda pretended she thought were raw chicken. And so she was very worried about his health. But obviously, chicken nuggets are cooked. It's just they're frozen, so nobody would normally eat that. But I mean, someone who's on a hunger strike is not going to eat frozen chicken. They don't eat it at all if they're on a hunger strike.
Right.
So you wouldn't have to lock up the food. And you're right. I think that most people whose kid was refusing to eat would be encouraging them to eat, certainly not using food restriction as a punishment. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Once again, it just makes no sense.
So, fast forward, this was a jury trial. The jury only took an hour to deliberate, which is pretty quick, and coming back guilty. She was found guilty of life and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder. Her parental rights for all children were terminated. And she was also charged and found guilty of first-degree child abuse. And I think it said 50 to 100 years, which I don't know if that is just like each count. Like, I'm not quite sure what number actually she'll end up with, but it doesn't really matter. Nope, she's not getting out.
That's true.
And then she was credited 575 days because that's the time she spent in jail during the trial, which again doesn't really matter if you're never getting out.
Yeah.
Or maybe just for your rap.
I mean,
so when you're in for 20 years, you could be like, but I have 500 saved. Like, I don't know why that even matters.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like beating a dead horse kind of a thing.
Yeah.
A little overkill. But I mean, I think they just really wanted to make sure that she would have no possibility of ever getting parole.
Yeah. And
because when you do 25 to life, it's not quite enough.
Yeah. And it is not good, like, important to say that this was an excessive extenuating circumstance because it was longer than the typical guidelines for charges, specifically the child abuse charge. And that basically gives the judge that kind of discretion for sentencing where in very unique circumstances, they do have that professional discretion of being like, you know what, that's just not enough. Like, it's just for what you did, it's not enough. And again, this trial judge, I think, is great. during the trial and even during the sentencing, he had this super cute little picture of Timothy up, smiling, happy, and any of these horrific photos and videos weren't shown in open court because he wanted to preserve the memory of this little boy. And he was just, I think he handled it very well, where he's like, you stripped him of everything. You're not going to strip the image that's about to go national. This is going to be the picture that everybody sees, is this smiling boy, and this is who you did this to. Kind of like humanizing who he was. And it was described as a Holocaust victim, is what he looked like. And the fact that, like, I think she just basically dehumanized her own son and her brain. And the judge was trying to be like, no, this is a live person. And you're going to feel it if it's the last thing I do. Like,
oh, I mean, she really did strip him of everything. I think I actually cried a little bit when the judge explained the picture because I thought that was a beautiful message.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really important to not think of Timothy as someone who was like some sort of poorly behaved monster, like Shanda is trying to make him sound like, that he somehow deserved all of the things that were happening to him, which is definitely what she's saying, is like, well, yeah, I did it. Yeah, I told Paul to abuse him, but
this is
I mean,
why.
it was justified because of his behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like that, and it doesn't, it also, I think we need to talk a little bit about potentially why Timothy would have some bad behavior. And I think that's something really, really important that Shanda did strip him of was his medication, because when he was living with his father, he was on multiple medications.
Mm-hmm.
And when he moved to Michigan, he had not seen a doctor. He was not on any prescriptions. He went cold turkey off all of his psych meds.
Yeah.
And she was saying that he was such a zombie when he was on the medication, but he's unmanageable and uncontrollable without restraints and full-on surveillance equipment otherwise. So she somehow decided that was better. And then she was saying that he would keep them awake all night, but maybe he's awake all night because you took him off all his medication.
Mm-hmm.
And you're making him sleep in a closet. So he's not very comfortable.
Right.
And he was waking them up because she had motion sensors on him. And I don't know what the plan was. I have no idea what her motivations were for doing this.
And
Do you have a theory?
Her motivation? No. I think so it's hard because I think there's more to, if we knew more about Oklahoma, things would make more sense about motivation. Because during her sentencing, which she declined to speak during, but her other two children that were not involved did speak. So you have Millie, who was one of the middle children, basically said she ignored Timothy and never checked up on him the minute that she left the house, which I think she's feeling a lot of guilt for now. But then you have Nolan, who I would not love to hear about it because it's going to be awful, but I think it would be interesting because he made a statement during his testimony to the court where he thought his mom was better than his childhood. So clearly had happened where I don't think he ever thought that she would kill someone, but it didn't seem like he was surprised that this is where they were. And you gotta wonder, like, from a psychopathy, like, what was her childhood like? What did she go through? Or is it just a wiring? Because clearly Nolan experienced things during his childhood that were traumatic and terrible at the hands of his mother, where this wasn't shocking to him. So that's what I think is
That's a really good point.
Is odd. And then you also
Because
have Paul, her other son, who's her co-defendant,
mhm,
who
right.
he went through his court and he's serving 30 years in prison for basically being the enforcer of the abuse that led to the child's death. He did his mother's bidding. And
Right.
I look at that
Absolutely.
where a lot, and again in those text messages, for me, I read it more as like he's 20, but he's behaving like a defiant teenager and like just is just doing what he's told. So you gotta wonder if no one experienced abuse and trauma, and Paul definitely did, and the eldest, so he probably got the most of it for the longest, and so conditioned where if it's not happening to me, I'm safe if I'm doing it to somebody else. Where like his abuser made him into an abuser. So I think there's so much more that just didn't come out because it's just no way to, and there was no need to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess there was no need to, but I think it's interesting that you say the cycle repeats itself because I'm looking at this is just from Reddit, but it's called The Cycle Repeats Itself. And it's background about Shanda's family, which I wasn't really able to find other places.
Yeah.
She says herself that she has an older brother that lives in her house in Oklahoma and that she has two sisters who she hasn't talked to in 20 years. But she does not talk about her parents. She just talks about her in-laws and her brother and her sisters. But apparently she had spent time in foster care. Her parents lost custody of her when she was, I think, 11 or 12.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say here, 11 or 12, and she was not cared for well and in foster care. And apparently her father had been convicted of sexually abusing a 14-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And there was allegations that he abused her as well. And there are many allegations on many different sources that Shanda's mother went to prison for trying to kill her own mother.
Yeah. So like you gotta like there's some history there that like led to how you can. I'm a firm believer of like things cause people to do things, and no one is just necessarily wired that way. I think we'll never truly know because this was a standard court case that just was about a really horrific incident. But I do think something definitely had happened. Do you have a theory on anything?
Well, so I have seen other cases where a parent targets just one child in a family to abuse. I mean, that's before I was thinking about Nolan and Paul as victims of abuse as well, and probably your daughter too. But it does seem like Timothy was a special project and he got treated much worse than everyone else. And I was looking it up, and I think it's called Cinderella syndrome or Cinderella abuse. It's also called single target. And it's where a parent just, there's something about that child that triggers something in them, and they focus all of their abuse on that child. And the result of that is that the other children, instead of defending the sibling being abused, tend to align themselves with the abusive parent because they're recognizing that they're getting treated better and they want to stay on that side.
Mm-hmm.
So they become more compliant and more willing to do what you want. So I think for Paul's end, I could understand for sure how that happened. And then I think with Timothy, I think that Shanda herself is pretty neurodivergent. I think that she says that she has sensory processing disorder and OCD, which doesn't make you neurodivergent necessarily. But I think that she saw a lot of herself in Timothy. I think that his struggles irritated her, and she didn't believe that he really had all of these problems that he was struggling with, because there are many text messages where she's saying that he's faking it, basically. Like he'd be pretending to be autistic. And she would always reference that he would act like he couldn't hear her. But if he has autism and a sensory processing disorder, it's not like he's just choosing not to listen to you. And I think that she didn't accept his disabilities, and she was just very angry at him for being disabled.
Well, that
which
also
is
makes him
horrible.
an easier target. Like, once he
Yeah,
became
that's
in
true.
her control, all the other kids had the ability, to the best of our knowledge, to eventually say something and speak out. Kids who are disabled tend to struggle doing that. So he might not have been able to, particularly if they pulled him out, he might not have had the verbiage or knowledge on how to ask for help or get help or whatever the case is. It's an easier target than your non-disabled. For Sandra is, like you mentioned before, she did put in an appeal last month, actually. So this is very new. Because she wants the ability to get custody of her youngest child in the future, which is so comical to me on so many levels. Like, first of all, who in their right mind is going to give you that child? I'm sorry. No. No.
Nobody.
And second of
Of
all,
course not. Well, she wants to, even if she remains in. Oh, I'm sorry.
oh, you
Second of all,
you were right about to say what I was going to say. You're in prison like for the rest of your life. What custody could you truly
yeah.
have?
But also, she wants to retain decision making for him. She wants to be able to force him to visit her in prison,
Yeah, that's
which
really
right
the
now he
only
doesn't want to
thing.
do, and his grandparents are not forcing him to do.
Rightfully so. I wouldn't force my kid or my grandkid to do that
Of
either.
course.
Like, hey, you want to go talk to your super
Let
traumatic
that child
mother?
have peace.
Like, this kid's going to be in so much
Oh my
therapy, it's
gosh.
not even funny. Just let him be.
I hope he's in therapy. I mean, the poor child, he lost his brother, he lost his father, and his mother and his other brother are going to prison or are in prison.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually one more thing about Paul, which I feel like we didn't talk about Paul very much, but he doesn't have a lot of his own stuff going on. It really is all Shanda, and then she just kind of some people say he's also kind of a psychopath, but I'm not really sure.
I agree there's not a ton about him, but I also think
He
he's a product of his mother. I think he did exactly what he was told.
yeah. Yeah. He's engaged now.
How do all these prisoners find love? It just shocks me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's kind of like Love After Lockup.
We need to do an episode on that show. We've talked about that show before. It's just
Oh, please.
so good.
Oh my God, I would love to. I love all the prison shows.
So, all right. So, wrapping up for Miss
I don't know.
Shanda, what are your final thoughts?
Final thoughts. She is totally guilty, and she ruined a lot of people's lives. And I hope that she is having a terrible time in prison, although I fear she's probably doing pretty well.
I don't know.
And then
Prisoners,
I hope I can watch more stuff about Paul's wife.
yeah. I typically like people who torture children. But yeah, Paul
That's
might be
true.
interesting. I'll be curious if like Paul does his time and then comes out and like with a documentary in 10 years on talking about like what their childhood actually was like. That'd be really interesting.
That would be great. I mean, he mentioned in some of his prison phone calls that HBO has been talking to him about doing a documentary. So I'll definitely watch it.
Oh, same, for sure. Well, Miss,
I mean, it's probably gonna be good.
oh, it's gonna be so good. They have a lot coming out, really. So I believe it. Well, I think that's all of my
Definitely.
thoughts on her and poor Timothy, and I'm glad that
Mine too.
the justice system put her away because I think she got everything she deserves, and there's still things she deserves because
Yeah.
Timothy's not here. So.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I guess that's maybe the only thing I had left to say is like her defense attorney afterwards was interviewed and he said it's the worst case he's ever worked on. It'll haunt him forever and that justice was served. So I don't think he was too broken up about the loss.
No, and honestly, it's kind of funny. Like, defense attorneys get such a bad rap. And don't get me wrong, some of them are scum. But, like, a lot of them are just doing their job. They're like, listen, I recognize she's a horrible person,
Right.
but I still have to do my job. Like,
Right.
if it's not me, it's someone else. Like,
Oh, totally. I mean, it's like representing Jodi Arias. It's like, what are you going to do?
yeah, exactly. So I sometimes feel bad.
But everybody deserves a defense.
Yes, because
You know, you're entitled to it.
unfortunately, there are people in the prison system that are actually innocent, and I will recognize that. The majority are not.
Totally.
And there's no question Shanda is guilty of everything she was charged, plus some. So, well, thank you for chatting with me tonight.
Crystal, I have one more question for you.
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry. I just thought of one more thing.
I'm ready.
Just thought of one more thing. You said that you didn't think Eric Ferguson is legally responsible for, or I don't want to put words in your mouth. Do you think Eric Ferguson, Timothy's father, should be charged in relation to his death?
Charged? No. But I do think he is somewhat morally responsible for it. Just because when it comes to criminal charges, I struggle with the idea of what he actually did criminally, because him giving their child to the biological mother, he had no, unless he knew and like they talked about like, hey, I'm gonna like neglect our son, like it's just negligence, but negligence isn't necessarily a criminal action unless he himself does something. I think morally he probably knew his ex-wife was a bad person and he probably shouldn't have done it, but I don't know criminally how he would be held responsible personally. What do you think?
So I think, in my opinion, I think that it was child neglect on his end because he had full legal custody of Timothy. And when you have full legal custody of someone, it is your responsibility to make sure that they are in a safe environment. In fact, you are supposed to provide the environment. But there was a court order preventing Shanda from having custody due to allegations of child abuse. She gave over her parental rights. So now Eric is the only one with parental rights, and he is not supervising this child. He does not appear to be checking in on this child, and he is not ensuring his safety in any way. And I do think that he neglected him.
Yeah.
And that if he had played any sort of role, he would have known.
There are some states, and I'm not familiar with Michigan or Oklahoma, that in order to get custody back, the other parent... Can you not hear me anymore?
No, I do now. Sorry. It said that you were having connectivity issues.
I need to
It was orange instead of green.
Am I back to...
I'm actually going to have to like listen to this entire episode.
I'm so sorry.
To edit it, I mean. No, it's okay. It's fine. It's fine. I think we could probably wrap up here. I hope we don't have to re-record any of these segments. I don't know. I'm going to try to do this tomorrow. Hopefully we won't have to. I think it'll be fine. I think I can make some creative edits.
All right. Well, you let me know. I'm back on Sunday afternoon if we need to.
Okay. I feel like we should maybe just quit while we're ahead here, though.
Yeah.
I think it was pretty good when we actually got to talk without being interrupted, but it just...
Yeah, I agree.
It's connectivity issues and
we'll wrap.
Robot sounds.
So weird.
I can't hear you. I hope you have a really good night.
Have a great night. It was good chat.